Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host, Korey Gunz, along with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert, Tom Colohue. And on this week's episode, we're going to talk about Big E's big push. How do you feel about winning titles by countout? And the possibility of SummerSlam heading out to the open sea. And speaking of SummerSlam, on this week's Raw, we had it confirmed that the main event for that show will be Drew McIntyre defending the WWE Championship against the Viper Randy Orton. Tom, can you tell us first, when was the decision made to go with this match as the main event for this year's SummerSlam?
Well, the discussion started pretty much immediately after the recording of the greatest wrestling match ever, when it became clear that Edge was out. Now, at the time, McIntyre versus Lesnar was still the plan, so they considered giving Orton something new and something different. Orton, for example, was interested in working with Tommaso Ciampa in NXT. Then more travel issues came in. There was a lot more issues preventing people from traveling into or out of the US, and the chances for having an audience at SummerSlam got smaller and smaller. So the actual firm decision was only made, say, a week or two ago, but discussion started right after Backlash.
With the official announcement that it is going to be McIntyre and Orton, does this effectively confirm that Lesnar will be off of the SummerSlam card this year?
It definitely does, yes. Especially when you consider that Bobby Lashley is also involved in the US Championship situation, or at least that division. That match with Brock Lesnar that he keeps trying to make happen seems very unlikely right now. SummerSlam has one less match, but it's probably still going to be a two-night affair just to fit all the matches on. So I don't think it's going to be a big problem having one less.
Also, you think this is going to be kind of a repeat of WrestleMania? The SummerSlam is going to be a two-night event this year?
I would suspect so. They've essentially, the idea that has been rumored is that we're going to get a second show a week later. Now, that could be many things. That could be a Hall of Fame. That could indeed be an Evolution 2.0. But if it is an Evolution 2.0, then all the women's matches would be there instead of SummerSlam, keeping SummerSlam short. I personally do think we know there's going to be a takeover around that time. So when you have takeover and you have a SummerSlam card that's going to hopefully involve basically all of the titles, they have learned recently to keep pay-per-views short, especially when you consider that Extreme Rules was basically a commercial for Raw and SmackDown.
Now, we've talked about on the show in the past couple weeks about how hot of a heel Orton is, and we both agreed that really this was the match we wanted to see, that even though we knew McIntyre and Lesnar was on the table and maybe was even the plan going forward, that really we would probably prefer to see McIntyre and Orton. So here we are. If you were to book this match, how should this match go? Not necessarily what do you think will actually happen, but if you were in control of the creative team, how should this match go considering the current positions of both Orton and McIntyre?
Well, considering how often you and I have incredible booking decisions
True.
that only slightly involve some sort of magical experience, or the things like that, it seems as though I am on the booking team. So what I will say is, as long as there's a clean finish, I actually don't care who wins. That's really refreshing to me. That's how I feel when I watch New Japan. I don't care who wins. It's just a great spectacle. That's how it always should be when two people push this strong, clash together. I'd imagine it's how a lot of people felt when Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage had their match at WrestleMania. Now, of course, there's a high chance it's going to be an overbooked mess with Ric Flair heavily involved. But at this point, I think we just have to accept that there's always a chance of Ric Flair interference. Who wins? I don't know. I personally suspect Drew McIntyre will retain and then feud with Randy for the next few months. However, Drew did show probably the first crack in his armor, the first piece of vulnerability this week on Raw that he has done all year. So who knows how this is going to go? I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I am too. I agree with you. The fact that there's not really a bad outcome, I think, is what is so interesting and has me excited for this match. I think, on one hand, because Orton is so hot as a heel, that if you really wanted to cement Drew McIntyre as the guy, then you should have Drew McIntyre go over clean and, beat the best heel in the business, and that would really cement him as, the man and the champion. On the other hand, because Orton is so hot, I don't think it's a bad decision to maybe put the title on him and have Drew chase him for a while. Also because if Drew beats Orton at SummerSlam, I'm not really sure who else is left for McIntyre to really feud with at this point, at least until Lesnar comes back on a semi-full-time basis.
I agree with you there. It's very hard to spot the next feud because Drew McIntyre has been a very fighting champion. And as is the case for most fighting champions, especially right now, they run out of people to fight. Drew McIntyre fought 7 different opponents and beat 7 different opponents in the first 7 weeks of his championship run. That is an incredible return, but it does leave you with not many options left. Outside of a rerun of maybe Seth Rollins, maybe, and I would like to see this, a feud with Buddy Murphy would be worthwhile.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that match. What are some other matches that you think might fill out the SummerSlam card? We saw that the Street Profits and Andrade and Garza are going to go at it for the tag team titles. That was also made official on Monday Night Raw as well. But what are some other matches that you think could kind of fill the card the rest of the way out? You know, a couple matches that have been rumored, maybe some that because of certain storylines like The Fiend and Braun Strowman would seem like a lock to take place. So how do you see the rest of this card kind of being filled in as we head towards SummerSlam?
Well, The Fiend versus Braun Strowman is essentially clad in stone. It has been for a number of months now, particularly after the match at Money in the Bank, when it became clear that Bray Wyatt may have lost, but The Fiend would still be back. And then he left for a while because Bray Wyatt left to be with his family for a little while. Profits versus Andrade and Garza should be a lot of fun if it's given time. And it's another one where I'm kind of happy with whoever wins. They're slowly building a tag division to care about, even if they just need to find somewhere to give it a shot in the arm. And Ricochet and Cedric Alexander might be that team. The Mysterios versus Rollins and Murphy feud is really up in the air at the minute. It is currently on the SummerSlam agenda to have Rey and Dominic Mysterio against Seth Rollins and Murphy. However, that really depends on if Rey Mysterio signs a new deal. It's also possible we could see Dominic Mysterio versus Seth Rollins in a singles match, but that would be done as a way to convince Rey Mysterio to sign by essentially saying, here, we are pushing your son. There is an emergency backup situation, that being Seth Rollins and Buddy Murphy as a potential feud. That's why they teased it this week, but they could very easily just abandon that completely. On the women's side of things, there is definitely a suggestion that we're now going to see a Nia Jax versus Shayna Baszler feud, because essentially as Extreme Rules and the next night, that whole feud is really up in the air at the minute. So I think it's very possible we're going to see Sasha versus Asuka again at SummerSlam for the 3rd time in a month, meaning that Shayna Baszler once again has to wait her turn.
We're going to talk about the women's division in a little bit more detail here in just a minute. And it's funny, as far as, Rollins versus Murphy, that seems to be like that's been an emergency backup plan all the way back to like WrestleMania. We talked about because of some of the things going on with COVID and stuff that was kind of a backup plan if Kevin Owens wasn't available, that we would get Rollins and Murphy, and then now here we are in August, and it's like it's kind of in case of emergency, break glass and put Rollins and Murphy in a match together if all else fails. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm also very interested in Dominic Mysterio. I would be interested to see if they actually trust him enough to put him in a singles match with Seth as opposed to a tag match with Rey, which seems to make the most sense. But also you would think that being his debut match, being in there with his dad and as part of a tag team would maybe take some of the pressure off as opposed to going at it alone, with somebody at the level of a Seth Rollins. But if there was anybody that could probably pull him through his first match on a big stage, it would be Seth Rollins. Now, I alluded to it in the opening. Is there any truth to the rumors that there may be a location change for SummerSlam, that it may not be in a live arena, but also that it may not be in the Performance Center? I've actually heard a rumor that maybe they could go and have SummerSlam and have it held on a cruise ship. What can you tell us about this?
Well, Vince McMahon always has plans and backup plans, and then he has ideas and backup ideas. When it comes to SummerSlam, yes, they don't want it to be at the Performance Center, but this is a habit they are going to break into, to the point where they want to move away from the Performance Center. They will essentially take someone away, and like a group of performers away to a summer camp situation, film something there. they could take people away and do the separate cinematic matches, because they are worried that they are really driving them into the ground a little bit, to the point where we do have to think now, what are the cinematic matches going to be for SummerSlam? Because there have been cinematic matches since WrestleMania. A cruise ship is something that's been mentioned as a possibility, as a way that they can continue to mix things up, but it's very much still at the ideas phase. And I think really, I've got to say, whoever would have thought about having wrestling on a cruise ship? Now, I don't know about you, but I have never heard this idea before.
No, first time ever, I would have to say.
Absolutely. First time, and like the WWE would love it if you could forget anything else that may have happened involving cruise ships and wrestling. And if you could boost this one to the top of the Google rankings while you're at it, I'm sure they would love that too.
Greatest cruise ship wrestling ever. Just call it that.
That's it. You've nailed it. You've nailed it. The greatest cruise ever. Easy.
Now let's move on to the women's division. We said we was going to talk a little bit more about that in detail. Sasha Banks wins the Raw Women's Championship from Asuka. However, how'd you feel about that finish? Sasha Banks wins the title, but she wins it on a countout. What were your feelings?
I really don't like ever seeing a title change by countout, but at least it was consistent for the characters. Asuka had a genuine reason to essentially abandon the match and her championship. I have a lot of questions to ask about Stephanie McMahon here, removing champion's advantage when there was no reason to. There is precedent for, in this situation, just have a rematch. Asuka should have been, going into that match, the Raw Women's Champion, because she didn't lose. It doesn't matter if you don't win a match as champion. If you don't lose it, you don't lose the championship. That's literally what champion's advantage is. So at this point, I would really like to see Asuka in some way attack Stephanie McMahon and start a feud there. But Stephanie McMahon, as we know, has not come to the Performance Center since COVID kicked in. Now, quite why the production team would show Kairi Sane getting attacked and then nobody would bother to help for a very prolonged time is beyond me. It's on the big screen. Surely somebody could get there before Asuka did and break it up. The match itself was great, really high quality, one of the best I've seen on Raw in a long time. And we've seen from the ratings, a lot of people, like 225,000 people, turned off afterwards. The match was great. I think it deserved a clean finish. And honestly, I think Asuka should have been able to at least win one match clean as champion before she lost the belt.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of questionable decisions that have been made in this feud as a whole. I mean, obviously Extreme Rules, and then you've got the finish on Raw. I will say, though, when I first saw it, I hated the finish. I'm like you. I hated the fact that she won the title by countout, and it just seemed really lame, and I hated it. But I will give it this caveat. I thought Korey being in the back, screaming for Asuka to come help her, I thought was great drama, and I thought was really great for the Asuka character. So I think that, in my mind, as long as Asuka gets the belt back at SummerSlam, which is the direction I would go, is have Asuka versus Banks one more time at SummerSlam, and Asuka gets revenge and gets the title back, I think that I would be okay with it, because like you said, this finish really fits the characters that they've been building. However, if they give Banks the title and just let her run with it and act like, you know, this never happened, or don't ever come back to the fact that she won the title by countout, then I think it's a really lame finish and a lame way to put the title on Banks.
The biggest concern for me in all of this is that every championship that women can compete for is now tied up with Sasha Banks and Bayley. So you can't defend the tag team championships on a pay-per-view if, for example, the SmackDown championship is up for grabs. You can't. They're already taken up. You can't have the same people doing every match. You look at someone like Carmella, who we really haven't seen for a long time. She has nothing to fight for. You look at Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, who at the minute are experiencing quite a bit of tension. They really, since WrestleMania, held this whole show together using the Women's Tag Team Championship belts, and we haven't seen them defended in quite a long time. They only seem to focus on one Women's Championship at a time. Even though we had both titles defended at Extreme Rules, the Nikki Cross Bayley feud didn't get anywhere near as much attention as the Sasha Banks and Asuka feud did. And even now, that's true, because the match between Sasha and Asuka was hyped a lot more than the upcoming match between Bayley and Nikki Cross. I think it's a shame that all the belts are on two people. I think those two people are extremely deserving, to be fair. They have been the Rock. They have been the draw. But I think they should at least lose the tag team championships now in order to keep them prominent and relevant.
So that being said, to your point about two women basically hoarding the entire women's division titles, what do you think the plan is moving forward as we move into SummerSlam and even beyond? Are we going to see another Asuka versus Banks match? Could we see maybe a fatal four-way with Baszler and Nia Jax thrown in there? I've even heard rumors of maybe a winner-take-all type match with Banks, Bayley, and Asuka in a triple threat and just have the winner of the match take both of the women's titles. What do you think the plan is heading into SummerSlam and then moving beyond? Because you'd have to think we also eventually have to get to this Bayley-Sasha Banks feud that we've all been hearing about for, it seems like, 3 years.
The Bayley-Sasha Banks feud is something they are determined to do, and which every time they actually get the opportunity, they seem to get cold feet. They could have done it at SummerSlam. All they needed to do was have a clean loss for Sasha Banks at Extreme Rules, and then you can walk straight into it. They chose not to do that. They chose to take a title off Asuka instead. That they always seem to shoot themselves in the foot when it comes to actually sticking the landing on this one. The plan for SummerSlam is really hard to see because at this point, who knows? At Extreme Rules, literally the day of Extreme Rules, the whole script for the Raw Women's Championship was thrown out. That has had a knock-on effect on the SmackDown Women's Championship and the Tag Championship. And it just seems like they're making it up as they go along right now, and they haven't got a handle of what to do next. I'm not sure right now there is a plan for SummerSlam. But Baszler's come back. Nia Jax has come back. They are going to play into this. Now, a winner-take-all is rumoured, but I don't think that fixes the problem of title hoarding. What I would like to see is, for example, at SummerSlam, Bayley versus Mandy Rose. And Mandy Rose wins the SmackDown Women's Championship. And then continues her feud with Sonya Deville. For me, they are over, Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville. They can carry that championship. They will look good feuding over that championship. And Bayley, for at least a little while, can focus on other things. Asuka versus Banks look like it's almost guaranteed. But I think if you add in Baszler and Nia Jax, it at least makes it different. And you could be in a situation there, whereas Asuka and Sasha Banks, neither of them lose, but they still lose the championship. That, for me, opens a door.
Well, speaking of things being different, one thing we've become accustomed to seeing over on SmackDown is the New Day and seeing them always as a group. Even with Xavier Woods being out now with an injury, it's always been the New Day, Kofi, Big E, Xavier Woods. But it looks like now that Big E is going to get his time to kind of go it alone and go out on a singles run. We saw this past week on SmackDown, like I said, Woods is already out with an injury. Looks like Kofi is going to be on the shelf himself as well. So now is Big E's time. And if you look on social media, it seems to be a resounding support for Big E, that he's a guy that a lot of people have been clamoring for to get a singles push and they really see what he can do on his own. So now it looks like he's going to get the opportunity. So social media is all for it. How does Big E himself feel, though, about the prospect of getting a singles run without necessarily being a part of the New Day group?
The New Day have always been extremely open about how they feel as performers. And it's one of the many things that confuses me when I hear people say, for example, oh, Big E's going to turn heel. Big E, Xavier Woods, and Kofi Kingston have been extremely clear and extremely vocal. They have no intention of ever breaking up. They've also been clear, particularly Big E and Xavier Woods, that they always had a singular mission in the WWE, and that was to make Kofi Kingston the WWE champion. Having succeeded at that, Big E now has a shot at a singles run. I'm excited to see it. A lot of people are excited to see it. He could easily face AJ Styles at SummerSlam, or after SummerSlam, he could chase The Fiend if The Fiend becomes the champion at SummerSlam. Big E versus The Fiend could be a lot of fun, in my opinion. As regards the man himself, it's going to be strange without the brotherhood that the New Day brings. I want them to be cheering Big E on. I'm sure they will be, but they won't be actively doing so from there. He'll miss them, but likely still have a lot of fun. We're not going to see a different Big E. We're going to see the same Big E doing the same Big E things. We're just going to see him on his own for a little while. And honestly, I can't wait.
Is Kofi legitimately hurt? That was kind of the storyline reason we were given on SmackDown. Is that a legit injury, or is he just simply kind of being moved aside for the time being in order to allow Big E a little bit more of a spotlight on his own?
Kofi's absolutely fine. He's just been given 6 weeks off to take a quarantine period, go and see his family, take a quarantine period, and come back to work.
It still amazes me that, less than a year ago, we were in the middle of Kofi Mania, and now, I know he's been given this time. Sure, he's going to make the most of this time off, see his family, etc., but has basically been told, go take some time off. We don't really need you, and basically when he comes back, he may just be kind of the side piece to Big E. It's just amazing the trajectory that his career has had, and then, like I said, I find it baffling that they can't find something better for him as a former WWE champion other than just being Big E's buddy.
The WWE have mentioned to every member of talent that they have in that locker room, they have said to them, if you want to opt out of working, if you want to go and spend some time with your family, just tell us. That's where Daniel Bryan is at the moment. That's where Kevin Owens was for a couple of weeks. If you want to spend some time away, come to us. We will find a way to write you out. All we have to do is we ask you to give us the time to do that in a way that makes logical sense. That is what happened with Kofi. I'm sure he'll be very happy to be Big E's buddy and be in Big E's corner cheering him on when he does return.
Well, Kofi's definitely a big fan of his brothers Big E and Woods, but we found out this week that Adam Cole is not necessarily a big fan of Pat McAfee. We saw them have a heated confrontation on Pat McAfee's podcast. There were F-bombs being dropped. Adam Cole, got in his face, walked off the podcast, walked off the stage. It's all over social media. If you haven't seen the video, it's easy to find. Obviously, the first question that's going to be on everybody's mind, though, Tom, is, was this a work or was this a shoot?
Well, I can say that nobody in WWE is confirming this one way or another. And by not confirming it, I mean they won't confirm, it was a shoot, which highly suggests it's a work. However, be aware that anyone saying definitively it's a shoot or a work, they don't know definitively. They just think so. I am very confident, regardless of shoot or work, the WWE are very happy with the exposure that they're getting from it.
Yeah, Triple H went on social media and kind of extended an invitation to Pat McAfee to come to NXT and hash out his differences with Adam Cole. So I think that maybe kind of somewhat tipped their hand a little bit to this being, a work and being more of a publicity stunt. What was your thoughts on Triple H kind of following this up with his invite to Pat McAfee to, come on down to NXT and, let's talk it out?
That was the biggest giveaway for me. I think it's also very telling that Adam Cole posted an apology on Twitter while Pat McAfee was on air, actually live, and would be able to read it out at the end of his show. That was another giveaway for me. If there was any sort of personal issue, they would communicate outside of the public eye, certainly not on social media. And if there was an issue with, like a genuine issue between Cole and McAfee, either they'd make sure Pat McAfee did not work NXT anymore, or when he did work takeover shows, they'd just allow him to play up to their history so that he could say, Adam Cole's definitely going to lose because he's this, he's that. They've given their game away a little bit, and I mean that in the closest of puns. They've given the game Triple H away with this one.
So assuming that this is all a work, what is, to play off the pun again, what is the end game? Are we going to see Pat versus Cole in the ring? What's the blow-off going to be to all of this when it comes to a conclusion?
If Pat McAfee wants to get into a wrestling ring, Adam Cole is the person he would want to get in a wrestling ring with. At least before this, they were very close if it is indeed a work. I'm sure they are still very close. And Adam Cole is an incredibly safe worker that is very well trusted. So if they're going to get in the ring, that's the way to do it. And that certainly gets more people's eyes on both products by having that cross promotion. I reported here and I reported on Sportskeeda a while back that Adam Cole may just be essentially killing time for a little while because the WWE still has some convincing to do to convince all 4 members of the Undisputed Era to move to Raw or SmackDown. There is believed to be some disagreements there because some of them, or just one of them, want to stay on NXT, whereas they want to move them as a unit.
Let's end the show on a couple little quick hitters here and maybe a little bit of discussion here at the end, something I want to get your thoughts on. First, we've seen on social media, there are reports that Vince McMahon has a backup plan if and when the state of Florida is shut down. You know, we still are dealing with COVID and the fallout of all that. And so the Performance Center is located in Florida, but there have been rumors that maybe at some point, if it gets bad enough, Florida may be shut down, or maybe the WWE would not be allowed to film there anymore. But apparently Vince does have a backup plan if that is indeed the case. Is there anything that you can tell us about what exactly that backup plan would be?
I mentioned earlier that Vince always has a number of backup plans. He's mentioned on conference calls, and I've spoken to people about this. Now, the company has a number of offers on the table of states that want to bring the WWE to their state because they believe that having the WWE there will be beneficial financially to that state. Oklahoma have been the most aggressive in their pursuit. They have been particularly eager to have the WWE recording there.
This topic is a little bit near and dear to my heart. If you listened to the show last week, we talked about Aleister Black, and I talked about how much of a fan I am of him and that I wasn't sure why it seemed that his push had kind of come to a screeching halt over on Raw. And we discussed that the possibility that maybe Vince McMahon or maybe even Bruce Pritchard was maybe a little bit more down on him than maybe Paul Heyman was. He was in control of the creative team over on Raw. There's a report out now that Vince McMahon has not soured on Aleister Black, which, judging by his booking on the past couple weeks of Raw, you could have fooled me if that's the case. But what can you tell us about the way that Vince McMahon views Aleister Black and what may be in store for him in the future?
Well, what I said last week was that Vince McMahon feels that there is something missing with Aleister Black. The report this week, which for some reason a lot of people seem to think argues against what I was saying, says that Vince McMahon feels that Aleister Black is held back by his gimmick. Sure sounds like he thinks something is missing to me. Now, Vince McMahon does think something is missing, and he's looking to try and make subtle tweaks to his character to change that. Now, this particular D-push, as it may or may not be, could just be, as I've mentioned with Kofi Kingston, Aleister Black has requested some time off to go and spend with his family. So he's picked up an injury that will give him long enough to do that. Now, curiously, and I always find this very entertaining, a few people apparently massively misread my quote last week and thought I'd said that Vince had completely given up on Aleister Black and we'd never see him again. I really don't understand wrestling fans sometimes. If anyone does think that, please do read the quote again, because it's very clear that I say things have changed, namely Heyman going, which was literally the very next sentence in the quote, and that Vince McMahon felt something was missing, which has been confirmed. So I think I'll say to a few people, if you're not sure what you're reading, come straight to the source. It's the easiest way to know what's going on. Don't let someone misinterpret something, misquote something, and then take that as gospel.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that, you know, Vince feels like the thing that's missing from Aleister Black is his gimmick, that's what's holding him back. But you even mentioned on the podcast last week that, you know, Vince was the one that added the creak sound effect to his entrance, and, you know, when he rose up from the floor and, you know, kind of essentially made him this vampire-esque type character. So it just seems funny to me that it sounds like Vince has had a lot of hand in creating Aleister Black's gimmick, but he also feels that that's what's holding him back.
Aleister Black's gimmick was entirely made in NXT. There are numerous examples of Vince being unfamiliar with gimmicks that he hasn't had a hand in creating himself. So to me, the entrance change was Vince McMahon trying to tweak the character to make more sense to himself, or to make more sense to, for example, kids, which is what he did with the Ricochet bullet sound. The idea there being to be more appealing to children. It is Vince trying to bring the gimmick into a place whereby it works for Raw or SmackDown. And by works for Raw or SmackDown, I mean works for Vince McMahon.
I couldn't help but laugh whenever you said that the way Vince is going to make things more relatable to children is to add bullet sound effects. Like, let's add guns and bullets,
why he did it.
and because that will make it more relatable to children, is to add heavy artillery to the gimmick.
He added the Ricochet sound to suggest that, and added the whole superhero thing a bit more, really played up to that. And apparently that was his plan, to make Ricochet more appealing to children.
Oh, awesome. Last thing I want to ask you about, and this is more of just I want to get your thoughts on, a journalist, and this is something I've heard on other podcasts and social media lately, especially with, all the issues with COVID and things of that nature. And, we're seeing the effects that it's having on professional sports as, the NBA and the NFL and the MLB here in the States are all getting ready to start back up and go into training camps, etc. And we've seen it have an effect on, some of the wrestlers in the WWE as well, and have an effect on their availability. Do you think that an off-season could be something that could work for the WWE or just for wrestling in general? And that's not a new idea. That's been talked about for a while. You hear it brought up every couple of years when things seem to maybe getting stale storyline-wise or creatively or whatever. But especially now with COVID, and we've seen that they're already producing things with a limited roster and people being available and not available. Do you think that the WWE could benefit from having a specific timeline where they take a couple months off, in the summer? Maybe they have a season that maybe ends at WrestleMania, and then they take a couple months off and then restart, kind of just like a lot of other, television series where they have a season, so to speak, and then they're off a couple months, and then they come back fresh, maybe in the fall. What would your thoughts be on that, about having a true off-season for wrestling?
Well, the time between WrestleMania and SummerSlam is always record low numbers. It has been every year for the past 10 years or so. So if they were going to do it, that would be the time to do it. However, I have absolute confidence that the WWE will never have an off-season for one simple reason. If the WWE shuts its doors for even a month, their viewers are going to go and watch AEW. Their viewers are going to go and watch Impact, New Japan, Ring of Honor. They will still find wrestling elsewhere. And will they come back? That is what the WWE is concerned about. That's why they won't have an off-season. However, they are closer now than ever before because people are being given time off. People are being rotated in and out. And even though they have quite a small roster right now, once a couple more NXT call-ups happen, and once a couple more of the trainees get up to speed in NXT, they will have slightly too many people, which is the perfect situation. Whatever you're doing, and this is just a rule of business, always have slightly too many people. That way you cover sickness, you cover holidays, you cover contract disputes, you cover all of this. At the moment, there is a lot of change going on with WWE contracts because people are a lot more aware. Now that you've seen Ronda Rousey come in and essentially she supposedly signed a 3-year contract and hasn't been seen for more than a year. She just hasn't been there. I would love that contract personally, to get paid for 3 years and only work one.
Sure.
Sorted. I'd have no issue with that. You see, Randy Orton, Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, the Usos, limited date contracts. And you are getting more and more people in that situation. Personally, I believe that is the future of the WWE. I think we're going to be closer to 9-month-a-year contracts. Now, I'm not saying they're going to take 9 months of work and then 3 months off. That's very unlikely. But you will have dedicated time off. You will skip live events for 2 weeks. You can skip Raw for a month. Stuff like that. I think that's where we're heading from every contract I have seen, or at least been privy to details of recently. That is where we're heading.
Eric Bischoff has been a guy that I hear continually refer to wrestling as episodic television. So it's like one just big, long, ongoing television show, same as kind of soap operas. So my question to you would be, you talked about driving viewers off if they were to take a break. What do you think would drive viewers off more, having an off season and taking a break, or bad creative because they have to continually try to come up with ideas all year long? So, like I said, we've seen before, sometimes the well runs a little bit dry and there's not really a whole lot of compelling things going on in the WWE at one particular time. So my question would be, would viewers more likely to go away and not come back just because they took a couple months off? Or, hey, we're here every month, every Monday, every Friday, but we're not giving you that great of a product. So which do you think would run viewers off more?
There is empirical evidence that a prolonged break will drive more viewership away than bad creative. That empirical evidence is that on my Twitter feed, I see thousands upon thousands of people accusing the WWE of having bad creative and then watching the next week. The drop in viewership that the WWE has is consistent. It is this low because this. It is this low because this. Every year at this time, they struggle for viewership, and it goes down by roughly the same amount. It's much closer to a line than any sort of curve if you actually track the numbers. In addition, I have met so many people who tell me that WWE has easily the worst creative out of all the wrestling companies. It is still the most watched by a massive amount.
We appreciate you all watching and listening again this week, and we hope that you keep coming back. And make sure that you like or comment on this week's video on the Sportskeeda's YouTube channel, and also make sure that you drop them a subscription as well. You can also subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel for even more wrestling news and notes. You can follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue, and I'm at Korey Gunz if you'd like to give me a follow. And also make sure you check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. Thank you for joining us again this week, and we will see you next time on the next Dropkick DiSKussions.